Welcome. Thank you for visiting. I trust this will be informative and well worth your while. Be patient. I'm slow, but I try to be as thorough as possible. Now, just take a moment and look at what it is that Harut and Marut have destroyed. They have destroyed the temples of the three loves, agape, phileo, and eros, of reverence, piety, of affection, and of erotic love, sexual love. They have destroyed it. They have intervened at all three levels for the last 3,000 years, destroying every approach that is sacred, systematically, theologically, intellectually, philosophically, destroying what God has joined together as His divine order. For indeed, the kingdom of God is within us. It is not without us. Think about it. This is what they have done. O mankind, keep very consciously fearful of your sustainer, who has created you out of one living entity, and then by its division into two halves, but still complete beings, in the form of male and female, He created its mate, and out of their spiritual and physical mating spread abroad a multitude of men and women, a multitude, one being, split in half, male and female, but still complete individual beings. And remain consciously aware of God, in whose name you assert your rights, your kinships upon one another. Verily, God is ever watchful over your journey of evolution. This is a new translation of Al-Quran by Yusuf Zai. I say interesting because in the Jewish scripture, Al-Torah, in Genesis, it states the same thing, because the word that is used for rib actually means Adam's half. The original being was split in two, according to Al-Torah, according to the Old Testament. This is interesting, and this should be listened to by those with ears to hear and eyes to see. The mistranslation rib is very misguiding. Your wife is not your rib. She is your other half. With her, you complete another being, a third being. And perhaps this is where they surreptitiously got the idea of a trinity. But if there is a third being, it's only by virtue of unity. The Old Testament clearly states that Adam was split in two. Well, you can say split. What the Old Testament says is that instead of rib, it took one half of this original being and formed both halves into male and female. That's what the Old Testament actually says. Here we have representations of the human brain. Each brain has two halves. The one on the left, marked imagination, is the female brain. The one on the right, marked reason, is the male brain. You can also say the one on the left, imagination, is the yin brain, and the one on the right is the yang brain. It's kind of like that. What it really represents is the yin, or the imaginative faculty, is mostly centered in the right side of the brain. The faculties of reason are mostly centered in the left side of the brain. Now, if you look at the female brain, the imaginative brain, you'll notice there the red markings. They represent connections, neural networks that communicate right to left or left to right simultaneously and in synchronicity, but not just with each half of the brain, but with each half of the body, with each half of the entire brain and the entire body. Yeah, symmetry. Women are wired, as you can imagine, for multitasking. Men are more linear, as you can see on the right there, marked reason. Their tasking is mostly left-brained, although they have certain right-brain faculties, but they have less left-to-right connections between both halves of the brain. This is in order to facilitate focus, concentration on one task at a time. That's why when a man sits at the breakfast table, drinks his coffee, and in the old days reads his newspaper, he doesn't want to be disturbed because he does one thing at a time and he focuses on it with all of his energy. The female, on the other hand, focuses on several things at one time, multitasking. And perhaps there's less of a focus on each task, but there's a need for both qualities, for both attributions, for both functions. They complement each other. Taking this a step further, I explain in my book, Sexology, the difference between the normal sexualization of the brain and the abnormal sexualization of the brain. The fact of the matter is, and medical science has been aware of this for decades, at least 40 years, perhaps longer, that men and women are born with male and female brains. Yes, the brain is sexed. It is genderized, if you will, before birth. This sexualization of the brain means that there is indeed a male brain and a female brain. And both forms of this genderized brain are formed before the end of the third trimester of pregnancy in the womb. And they are affected by the sex hormones, estrogen and testosterone, mostly testosterone. So that if there's enough testosterone during those early stages of the brain's formation, it will become male or masculinized. If there is insufficient testosterone, the brain will become feminized. And there are degrees of this process, so that the final outcome can be a tomboy, a girl who's slightly masculine in her being, or a boy who is effeminate, who's slightly effeminate in his presentation. but they are not homosexual. They are heterosexual at that level. If all levels of testosterone and development stages during pregnancy are normal, the brain becomes perfectly balanced in that gender. And that gender, the male gender, for example, contains some yin and some yang, mostly yang, mostly the male characteristics, if you want to put it that way. And vice versa is also true. Now, here's a chart that I have prepared for this book, Sexology. You should study it. And what we have here is what happens when there's not enough testosterone. Fetal androgen is another name for the testosterone. If the levels are too low in a developing male child, genetic male child, that child may well grow up with a feminized brain. And there are degrees of that, and that chart will explain it. Vice versa is true for the female child. If the testosterone is too high in a developing female embryo and fetus, by the end of the first trimester, that means by the end of 12 weeks, and this is true for both male and female, by the end of 12 weeks, most of the brain has already been formed and either masculinized or feminized. Without testosterone, the brain becomes feminine. Okay, if there's too much testosterone in a developing female child, the brain will be masculinized. Study this diagram, and you will get a pretty good overall handle on what actually takes place. This is a fundamental chart. Okay, it's not the be all and the end all, but it is scientific foundation that explains what happens. One more thing that you should realize about this. If the child develops a feminized brain and they have a masculine body rather than a feminine body, you've got a problem. And this is a conflict of interest between the brain and the body, because the body is not designed to be feminine if it's masculine and there's a feminine brain. This creates a problem for life. And another thing, 70% of the LGBT population that professes to be gay or homosexual or lesbian, they're born this way. But it's not by God's design. This is not an expression of divine order by any stretch of the imagination. What it is an expression of chaos as a result of modern lifestyles, to include insults to the mother during the first trimester, particularly traumatic insults, to include street drugs, alcohol, even medical interventions such as the birth control pill. All of these things and more, including diet and plastics, contain estrogenic substances that affect the level of these fetal androgens, which are so necessary for the symmetrical development of the right and the left brain. Enough said for now. If you wish to know more about this, please purchase the book and read. Without reading, you remain ignorant. And I'll tell you one more thing. If you depend on YouTube for your knowledge basis, you will also remain ignorant. And one more thing I will add to that is a caveat, if you will. If you remain ignorant, ignorance serves evil. if you are unfortunate enough to be subjected to an evil-minded leader. If you remain ignorant, you will not be able to oppose them. They will guide you. Your ignorance will allow them to guide you, and this is what conspiratorialists depend on. That's a fact of life, and they have incorporated it in their organization of worldwide evil. That's the fact of the matter. Normally, the right hemisphere supplies aspects of speech production, reception, and interpretation. The right hemisphere, as well as pre-lexical, lexical, and post-lexical components of visual word recognition. Forms of media, especially today's forms of mass media, they're organized, programmed to consciously override the interplay between hemispheres. This interplay allows the morally conscious decision making and emotional control. That's what the balance between the right and the left brain provides. By rewarding simulation rather than real time, real life, meaningful relationships, and innovation, the conditioned dissociation is a removal from reality. That's what happens. People begin to consciously serve the isolated imagination of the mass media's projection rather than the real-time flesh and blood reality. So that destroys relationship because the mind is then totally and completely preoccupied with the imposed simulation. That's what happens. To make matters worse, this separation of the right from the left, it erodes trust. I have explained this in a book called Trust. It's a collection of academic essays that explain the psychiatry, the psychology, and the outcomes of this manipulation, which is purposely done by those who control our mass media. This is true, dear listener. This is not a crazy idea. This is what they are doing. And it is why there is such a lack of unity in our humankind organizations, because humankind is not yet human. That's why we are called mankind or humankind, because the true human remains conscious with a full and complete integration of both halves. That's how it is. Now, let's talk about sex for just a minute. Everybody wants to talk about that anyway. I mean, at the drop of a hat, we're ready to do that. And but there are certain things that we remain ignorant of, and as I just said, if you are ignorant, you will serve evil. That's what happens. Unless you are under the guidance of genuinely moral humans who are conscious. That's what we need to do. That's what we should do. Remain conscious. Now, let me explain the function of three hormones: dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. As I've said, the three hormones: dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Dopamine, the highest degrees of dopamine, the highest amounts of dopamine are released during sex, specifically at the moment of orgasm. We'll talk about that later. Oxytocin is released also at the moment of orgasm, especially for the male. He receives his highest dose of oxytocin at orgasm. Serotonin is produced after orgasm during that wonderful post-orgasmic phase when we are lying there in this wonderfully sex-induced state. It's a trance somewhere between consciousness and unconsciousness. We're kind of half asleep, but yet aware. Dopamine gives you the highest degree of pleasure. Oxytocin gives you the highest degree of connection or association or belonging, what the Muslims should call salah or salat. All right, this is connection. It happens then at the moment of orgasm, especially when it is accomplished face to face, hip to hip. That's when the man is bonded to the woman. So, dear ladies, dear men, if that's what you wish, do it properly. Serotonin, on the other hand, is the hormone that provides us with this sense of satisfaction. No need to look elsewhere. No need for any other wild ideas or wild fantasies of the right brain looking for satisfaction. No, you should get it from your mate. Right there. God has designed this. Now, the interesting thing here is that the highest degrees of oxytocin are released when we look into each other's eyes. Is also the fact when we look into the eyes of our pets, especially dogs. Now, one more caveat here regarding consciousness. The entire animal kingdom is a mirror of the human unconscious world. It's a mirror. The entire animal kingdom, all that activity in the animal kingdom and more, is taking place within these two sides of the brain, all four sides in marriage, the male and the female, right and left side. All of that mirrors the subconscious world, which is why we should remain conscious. Otherwise, we become trained. Otherwise, we become conditioned. Otherwise, we remain merely humankind, but not truly human. So please, stay tuned. There's more to come. Very soon. Thank you. Peace be with you. Understand who you are, where you are, and what you must do for each other.